Sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the most extraordinary secrets. What started as a proud mother's simple wish to watch her son graduate from Navy SEAL training became a moment that would shock a decorated admiral and reveal a hidden truth that had been buried for over 2 decades. In a crowd of thousands, one tattoo would bridge the gap between past and present, between loss and hope, between a mother's sacrifice and a nation's gratitude. This is the story of how a single moment of recognition changed everything, and how some bonds are stronger than time itself. The sun was shining bright that day at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Families gathered with cameras and proud smiles, but none of them knew they were about to witness something that would leave even the most hardened military officers speechless. Sometimes the most powerful stories begin with the smallest details, and this one began with a tattoo that told a story of its own. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, as hundreds of families began gathering for one of the military's most prestigious ceremonies. The air buzzed with excitement and nervous energy as proud parents, siblings, and loved ones found their seats, cameras ready to capture the moment their heroes would officially become Navy SEALs. Among the crowd, Maria Santos adjusted her simple black dress and checked her watch for the 5th time in 10 minutes. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from her small hometown in New Mexico, taking 3 buses and spending her last savings to be here. Her weathered hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse, not from nervousness about the ceremony, but from the overwhelming pride that threatened to bring tears to her eyes before the event even began. 26 years old and standing at just 5 feet 2 inches, Maria looked younger than her years despite the hardships etched into her dark eyes. She had raised her son David alone since he was 3, working double shifts at a local diner and cleaning offices at night to make ends meet. There were times when she had to choose between buying groceries and paying the electric bill, times when David wore the same pair of shoes until they had holes in the soles because new ones weren't in the budget. But David had never complained. Even as a young boy, he seemed to understand the sacrifices his mother made. He would do his homework by candlelight when the electricity was shut off, telling his mother he was practicing to be tough like the soldiers on TV. When other kids had birthday parties at fancy restaurants, David would smile and say he preferred his mother's homemade cake anyway. Maria often wondered if she had failed him by not being able to provide more, but looking around at the impressive military base and knowing her son was about to graduate from the most elite training program in the world, she realized she might have done something right after all. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy. When David first told her he wanted to join the military, Maria's heart had nearly stopped. She had already lost so much in her life, and the thought of potentially losing her son to war was almost unbearable. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the same determination that had helped him excel in school despite their circumstances, that had driven him to work part-time jobs throughout high school to help with expenses, that had earned him respect from teachers and classmates who recognized his character. David had always been different from other kids his age. While his friends played video games or hung out at the mall, David spent his free time reading military history books borrowed from the library. He would tell his mother stories about heroes who had sacrificed everything for their country, and she could see the spark in his eyes that told her this was more than just a phase. When he announced his intention to try out for the SEALs, Maria had done her research. She learned that only a small percentage of candidates actually make it through the grueling training, and even fewer complete the entire program. The statistics were frightening. Hell Week alone eliminated most hopefuls, and the psychological pressure was said to break even the strongest minds. For months, Maria had barely slept, imagining her son struggling through impossible challenges, wondering if he was getting enough to eat, if he was staying healthy, if the instructors were being too hard on him. She sent letters every week, even though she knew he might not have time to read them, filling the pages with encouragement and reminders that she was proud of him no matter what happened. David had only been able to call her a handful of times during his training, and Each conversation had been brief, but Maria could hear something different in his voice with each call. The scared young man who had left her small town was transforming into something stronger, more confident. He spoke about his teammates with respect and admiration, about challenges that had seemed impossible until he conquered them, about finding strength he never knew he possessed. Now, sitting in the bleachers surrounded by other military families, Maria felt a mix of emotions she could barely contain. Pride, certainly, but also relief that the dangerous training was finally over. Nervousness about what assignments might come next. And underneath it all, a deep love for the young man who had never stopped calling her every Sunday, no matter where he was stationed or how busy his schedule became. She watched as other families chatted easily about military life, many of them clearly veterans themselves or longtime military spouses who understood the culture and protocols. Maria felt out of place in her simple clothes among women wearing expensive jewelry and men in crisp suits, but she reminded herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Her son had earned his place among these elite warriors through his own sweat and determination, and she had played her part by supporting him every step of the way. As the ceremony began and the commanding officers took their positions, Maria spotted her son in the formation of graduating SEALs. Even from a distance, she could see how much he had changed. His shoulders were broader, his posture straighter, and there was something in the way he held himself that spoke of newfound confidence and capability. The scared boy who used to have nightmares was now standing among America's most elite fighting force, and Maria felt her heart swell with pride. She thought about all the people from their hometown who had doubted David's ability to succeed. Teachers who had suggested he consider more realistic career options. Neighbors who whispered about whether a single mother could really raise a boy properly. Relatives who questioned whether someone from their economic background could ever amount to anything significant. Maria had never shared these comments with David, choosing instead to be his constant source of encouragement and support. The ceremony continued with speeches from high-ranking officials, but Maria found herself lost in memories of David's childhood. She remembered the night he had asked her why he didn't have a father like other kids, and how she had struggled to explain that sometimes families look different, but love each other just as much. She thought about the evenings when they would look through photo albums together, and David would point to the faded picture of his father in his army uniform, asking questions about a man he would never remember. The tattoo on Maria's shoulder, usually hidden beneath her clothing, felt warm against her skin as emotions overwhelmed her. It was a simple design, but it held profound meaning, a tribute to David's father, who had died when their son was just a toddler. Not in combat, as many might assume, but in a training accident that had shattered Maria's world and left her to raise David alone. The tattoo contained his military ID number, his rank, and the dates that bookend his short but meaningful life. Very few people had ever seen it, as Maria was not one to display her personal pain for others to witness. As the sun climbed higher and the ceremony progressed, Maria noticed several high-ranking officers in the VIP section. She recognized some of the ribbons and medals from her research about military decorations, understanding that these were men and women who had served their country with exceptional distinction. Among them was a tall, silver-haired man whose bearing commanded respect even among other senior officers. She would later learn that this was Admiral James Mitchell, a SEAL himself who had risen through the ranks to become one of the most decorated officers in the naval special warfare community. The Admiral had served in conflicts around the world, had led missions that remained classified decades later, and had earned the respect of subordinates and superiors alike. But even with all his experience and training, nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold when he caught sight of the woman in the simple black dress sitting in the family section, whose life was about to intersect with his in a way that would change everything. As the graduation ceremony reached its pinnacle, the newly minted SEALs stood at attention while their names were called one by one. The crowd erupted in applause, and Cheers as families recognized their loved ones stepping forward to receive their tridents, the coveted pin that marked them as members of the most elite fighting force in the world. Maria's heart pounded as she waited for David's name, her hands clasped tightly together as she tried to contain her emotions. Petty Officer David Santos. The announcer's voice boomed across the ceremony grounds. Maria shot to her feet, tears streaming down her face as her son stepped forward with perfect military bearing. The young man who had once been afraid of the dark was now walking among warriors, his head held high and his steps confident. She cheered louder than she had ever cheered for anything in her life, not caring that her voice was just one among hundreds, knowing that David would somehow hear her above all the rest. The heat of the California sun was intense, and as Maria raised her arms to applaud, her dress shifted slightly, exposing the upper part of her left shoulder. The tattoo that she normally kept hidden was now visible, black ink against her olive skin, the military markings clear and precise despite their age. She was completely unaware of this small wardrobe malfunction, her entire focus on her son, and this moment she had dreamed about for years. Admiral Mitchell had been watching the ceremony with the practiced eye of someone who had attended hundreds of military graduations. He took pride in seeing new warriors join the ranks, remembering his own graduation decades earlier and the mixture of pride and trepidation he had felt. As his gaze swept across the crowd of families, he was struck by the genuine emotion and sacrifice represented by each person in attendance. Military families understood better than most the cost of service, the long separations, the constant worry, and the pride that came with watching a loved one choose to serve something greater than themselves. His attention was caught by the woman in the black dress whose enthusiasm stood out even in a crowd of proud families. There was something pure about her joy, something that reminded him of why he had chosen this profession in the first place. As she raised her arms in celebration, the Admiral noticed the edge of a tattoo on her shoulder. Military tattoos were common enough, but something about the positioning and style of this one made him look more closely. What he saw made his blood run cold. The tattoo contained a military ID number that was burned into his memory, a number he had seen on countless documents, reports, and official correspondence over 2 decades ago. Sergeant Michael Santos, United States Army, had served under Admiral Mitchell's command during a joint operation in the early stages of both their careers. The Admiral had been a young lieutenant commander then, and Sergeant Santos had been one of the finest soldiers he had ever worked with. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. Michael Santos had been killed in a training accident at Fort Bragg, a routine exercise that had gone tragically wrong when equipment failed during a night patrol simulation. Admiral Mitchell had been the officer who had to review the incident report, who had to sign off on the investigation that concluded it was a mechanical failure that could not have been prevented. More importantly, he had been the one to recommend Sergeant Santos for a posthumous commendation for his service record and character. But what haunted the Admiral most was a conversation he had with Michael just weeks before the accident. The young sergeant had been showing pictures of his family, his wife Maria, and their infant son David. Michael had spoken with such pride about his little boy, about how he wanted to be the kind of father and role model that would make his son proud. He had talked about his plans after his enlistment ended, about how he wanted to use his military benefits to go to college and provide a better life for his family. Admiral Mitchell remembered the weight of signing the paperwork that would inform Maria Santos that her husband was never coming home. He remembered the sleepless nights wondering about the young widow and her child, hoping they would be okay, but knowing that military death benefits, while helpful, would never truly replace a father and husband. Over the years, he had occasionally wondered what had become of them, but military life had a way of moving forward, and new responsibilities had gradually pushed those thoughts to the back of his mind. Now, staring at the woman cheering for David Santos, the Admiral realized he was looking at Michael's widow and the infant son who was now graduating from the same elite military program that his father had dreamed of joining. The irony was overwhelming. The child who had lost his father to military service had chosen to follow in those same footsteps and had succeeded at the highest level. Admiral Mitchell watched David as he received his trident, noting the young man's bearing and the respect his teammates showed him. According to the graduation program, David had finished in the top 10% of his class, had shown exceptional leadership during Hell Week, and had been selected for advanced training that would make him eligible for the most challenging missions. The boy who had grown up without a father had become the kind of man that would have made his father incredibly proud. The Admiral's mind raced as he processed this revelation. He knew he should probably approach Maria after the ceremony, should introduce himself, and pay his respects. But he also understood that this might not be the appropriate time or place. This was David's moment, and Maria's moment to celebrate her son's achievement. Bringing up painful memories of her husband's death might overshadow what should be one of the happiest days of her life. As the ceremony continued, Admiral Mitchell found himself watching Maria more closely. He could see the strain around her eyes that spoke of years of hard work and sacrifice. Her clothes, while clean and appropriate, were clearly not expensive. Her jewelry was minimal, and her purse was worn but well-maintained. Everything about her suggested someone who had struggled financially, but had refused to let those struggles define her or limit her son's possibilities. The Admiral thought about his own children, who had grown up with the privileges that came with his rank and successful career. They had attended good schools, had college funds, had never wanted for anything material. Yet he wasn't sure any of them had shown the kind of character and determination that David Santos had obviously developed growing up in much more challenging circumstances. When the ceremony concluded and families began to reunite with their newly graduated SEALs, Admiral Mitchell watched as David found his mother in the crowd. The reunion was everything you would expect from a mother and son who had been separated during the most challenging months of the young man's life. Maria threw her arms around David, not caring that his uniform might wrinkle or that other people were watching. David, despite his new status as an elite warrior, became a little boy again for just a moment, hugging his mother with the unashamed affection of someone who knew exactly what she had sacrificed for him. The Admiral could see them talking animatedly, Maria touching David's face as if to make sure he was really there and unharmed, David gesturing excitedly as he probably told her about his training and experiences. It was clear that their bond was exceptionally strong, forged by years of facing the world together and supporting each other through every challenge. Admiral Mitchell made a decision. He would approach them, but carefully and respectfully. This was a conversation that was more than 20 years overdue, and while the circumstances were complicated, he felt a responsibility to honor the memory of Sergeant Michael Santos by acknowledging his family and recognizing the incredible job his widow had done raising their son. As he walked toward them, the Admiral's military training kicked in, helping him maintain his composure despite the emotional weight of the moment. He had delivered difficult news to families before, had comforted Gold Star mothers, and attended military funerals, but this felt different. This wasn't about delivering bad news or offering official condolences. This was about connecting with the living legacy of a good man he had known and respected, and acknowledging his sacrifice that had shaped the lives of the people standing before him. Maria was still adjusting David's uniform and fussing over him like the proud mother she was when she noticed a tall, distinguished officer approaching them. She had learned enough about military protocol during David's training to recognize high rank when she saw it, and something about this man's bearing suggested he was someone very important. David noticed him too and immediately snapped to attention, recognizing Admiral Mitchell from the ceremony and understanding that this was not someone who casually approached families without good reason. The moment that would change everything was about to unfold, bridging past and present in a way that none of them could have anticipated. "Mrs. Santos." Admiral Mitchell's voice was steady, but carried an undertone of emotion that immediately caught Maria's attention. She looked up at the tall, silver-haired officer with curiosity and a slight nervousness. High-ranking military officials didn't usually seek out families during graduation ceremonies unless there was something official to discuss. "Yes, sir," Maria replied, instinctively straightening despite not being military herself. David remained at attention beside her, clearly confused about why an admiral was approaching his family, but trained to show proper respect regardless of the circumstances. Admiral Mitchell took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would be unlike any conversation he had ever had. "Mrs. Santos, I need to ask you something that might seem unusual. Your late husband, was he Sergeant Michael Santos, who served with the 82nd Airborne Division?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She hadn't expected to discuss Michael at her son's graduation, and certainly not with a complete stranger, even one wearing Admiral stripes. Her hand unconsciously moved to her shoulder, with a tattoo lay hidden beneath her dress. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How did you know about Michael?" David's attention sharpened immediately. His mother rarely spoke about his father, and when she did, it was usually brief and painful. The fact that this high-ranking officer knew about his dad was both intriguing and concerning. "Ma'am, my name is Admiral James Mitchell. 23 years ago, I was Lieutenant Commander Mitchell, and your husband served under my command during a joint training operation between Army and Navy Special Operations units. He was one of the finest soldiers I ever had the privilege to work with." Maria's eyes widened with shock. After all these years, here was someone who had actually known Michael, who could speak about him as more than just a name on official documents. "You knew him?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I did," Admiral Mitchell confirmed, his own voice softening. "He talked about you and David constantly. He was so proud of his family, and he had such plans for your future together. When the accident happened, I was one of the officers who had to review the incident report. Mrs. Santos, I want you to know that your husband died serving his country with honor, and his loss was felt deeply by everyone who served with him." The words hung in the air as Maria processed this unexpected connection to her past. David stepped closer to his mother, providing silent support while struggling to understand how this moment had come about. Around them, other families continued their celebrations, unaware of the profound reunion taking place just a few feet away. "I saw your tattoo during the ceremony," Admiral Mitchell continued gently. "I recognized Michael's service number immediately. Mrs. Santos, I've wondered about you and David for over 20 years. I've hoped you were okay, that you were able to build a good life despite such a tremendous loss." Maria's composure finally broke, and tears began streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief and gratitude that someone else remembered her husband as more than just another casualty report. "It's been hard," she admitted, "but David has been my strength through everything. He's always wanted to honor his father's memory." Admiral Mitchell turned to David, seeing the young SEAL through new eyes. "Son, your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished today. The program you just completed is one of the most challenging in all of military service, and finishing in the top 10% of your class is an extraordinary achievement." "Thank you, sir," David replied, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of the conversation. "I've always tried to live up to what I thought my father would want from me." "Your mother told me about your father," Admiral Mitchell said, "and I can tell you that he was exactly the kind of man who would have raised a son like you. He had integrity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Those same qualities are clearly evident in you." The Admiral paused, gathering his thoughts for what he needed to say next. "Mrs. Santos, there's something else I need to tell you. Your husband was scheduled for promotion when the accident occurred. He was also being considered for selection to attend Ranger School, which would have opened up opportunities for him to eventually try out for special operations units. In many ways, David, you've achieved something your father dreamed of, but never had the chance to pursue." This revelation hit both Maria and David with unexpected force. Maria had always known that Michael was a good soldier, but she had never understood the full scope of his potential career trajectory. David felt a new connection to his father, realizing that their career paths had been more similar than he had ever imagined. "There's one more thing," Admiral Mitchell continued, reaching into his jacket pocket. "This might seem unusual, but I've carried something for a long time, hoping I might someday have the chance to give it to your family." He pulled out a small, official-looking envelope. "After the accident, your husband was awarded a commendation for his service record and character. The original was sent to you through official channels, but I kept a copy because Michael had made such an impression on me. I've always hoped I might have the opportunity to personally honor his memory." Maria accepted the envelope with shaking hands, carefully opening it to reveal a certificate and a small medal. The commendation spoke of Michael's exceptional dedication to duty, outstanding leadership potential, and unwavering commitment to the values of the United States Army. Reading these words about her husband from someone who had actually served alongside him felt like receiving a piece of Michael back after all these years. "Admiral," Maria said, struggling to find adequate words, "I can't tell you what this means to me. For so long, I felt like Michael's memory was mine alone to carry. Knowing that he made such an impact on people like you, that he's remembered by others who serve with him, it means everything." David was studying the commendation with intense interest, seeing his father's name and accomplishments in official military language for the first time. "Mom never told me about this award," he said quietly. "I never received it," Maria replied, looking confused. "At least, not that I remember. Those weeks after the accident are still somewhat blurry for me." Admiral Mitchell nodded understandingly. "Military bureaucracy isn't always efficient, especially during difficult times. It's possible it was lost in the paperwork or sent to an incorrect address. What matters is that your husband earned recognition for his service, and now you both know about it." As the conversation continued, other military families began to notice the unusual scene of a high-ranking admiral spending extended time with one family. However, rather than seeming intrusive, their presence felt respectful, as if they sensed they were witnessing something important and meaningful. "Mrs. Santos," Admiral Mitchell said, "I want you to know that the military community takes care of its own, and that extends to families like yours. If you ever need anything, if David ever needs guidance or support in his career, please don't hesitate to reach out. Your husband was the kind of soldier we build our entire force around, and your son is clearly following in those same footsteps." The Admiral then turned to David with a more official tone. "Petty Officer Santos, your record indicates you're interested in advanced training opportunities. I'd be happy to provide a recommendation for any special programs you might want to pursue. Your performance in SEAL training has been exemplary, and with your family's history of service, I believe you have unlimited potential in the special operations community." David was overwhelmed by this unexpected offer of mentorship from such a senior officer. "Thank you, sir. That would be an incredible honor." As the formal ceremony area began to clear and families moved toward reception areas, Admiral Mitchell prepared to leave. But before departing, he asked Maria and David if they would be willing to have dinner with him and his wife the following evening. "I'd love to tell you more stories about your father," he said to David, "and I think my wife would enjoy meeting the family of one of the finest soldiers I ever served with." Maria accepted gratefully, understanding that this invitation represented far more than a simple dinner. It was an acknowledgement of her family's sacrifice, a recognition of her struggles as a military widow, and an affirmation that Michael's service had mattered to people beyond just his immediate family. As Admiral Mitchell walked away, Maria and David stood together in comfortable silence, both processing the extraordinary turn their day had taken. What had begun as a celebration of David's achievement had become a bridge to his father's legacy and a connection to the military community that neither of them had expected. "Mom," David said quietly, "I wish Dad could have been here today." "He was," Maria replied, touching the commendation certificate gently. "In every step you took during training, in every challenge you overcame, in the character and determination that got you to this moment. Your father was here, David, and now we know that others remember him too. The tattoo on Maria's shoulder, which had accidentally revealed itself during the ceremony, had served its purpose in a way she never could have imagined. What was meant to be a private memorial to her husband had become the key to unlocking connections and recognition that had been waiting for over 2 decades to be discovered. As they walked toward the reception area together, Maria felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense that she and David weren't facing the world entirely alone. They had found their place in the larger military family, and Michael's legacy would continue through his son's service and the respect of those who had known him. The story that had begun with a single mother's determination to see her son graduate had evolved into something much larger, a testament to sacrifice, service, and the enduring bonds that connect military families across generations. Sometimes the most meaningful recognition comes not from official ceremonies or formal acknowledgments, but from unexpected moments when the past and present intersect in ways that honor both memory and hope.